Welcome to this webinar on loneliness and isolation. It's really lovely to have you all here this morning. My name is Beth and I run the support groups and the workshops for Women's Trust. Right, we're going to have a break in 45 minutes, so you can have a cup of tea and a break then, but in the meantime, I'm going to start. So some things to think about. Please think about self-care whilst watching this webinar. If you are watching this because you have experienced domestic abuse, you may become tearful and sad or angry. This is normal, you have all suffered. So please, it's really important to try and be kind to yourself whilst watching this. If you need to take a break, that's fine. If you need to turn off, that's fine. If you need to get some tissues or a cup of tea or some fresh air, please do. You are in control, you can leave at any point. Different memories may come up during this webinar and this may be distressing, so please try and be kind to yourself. You may be very tired afterwards, so if you are able to, you may want to rest if you're not working in a safe and peaceful environment. Now we're looking at loneliness and isolation, and as in all of my webinars and all of my work, self-compassion is the main tool for healing when you've been affected by domestic abuse. So that's always what we come back to. Okay, it might be a bit repetitive for some of you who've been to the webinars before, but personally, I don't think it's a message you can hear too many times. Okay, so please think about that whilst you're watching this. Okay, the aims of the webinar are the following: to understand why we feel so lonely and isolated due to the pandemic of domestic abuse and the pandemic of COVID. I put that in because I looked up the definition of pandemic. It's a disease that's global, that affects a large majority of people. And to me, domestic abuse is that. It's so widespread. And we're going to be looking at a few statistics. People who are watching this, you're not only experiencing or have experienced domestic abuse, but you're also experiencing that within another pandemic of COVID. And it's been a particularly tough last year for women affected by domestic abuse. It's been really, really tough. So please do think of yourself with compassion. If you're struggling with loneliness and isolation, please be kind to yourself. It's been a huge issue for so many people who've come to Women's Trust in the last year. So the other aim is understanding how loneliness and isolation affects us and impacts on our mental health. And we'll also look at the relationship between trauma and isolation. And we're going to look at the importance of self-compassion in healing and how to develop and practice self-compassion as part of your healing journey. Now, this webinar is only about 1.5 hours. It's not going to fix everything. The idea is just to get you starting to think about yourself with understanding and compassion. Okay, here are the contents. Some facts about domestic abuse. What actually is loneliness? How does loneliness relate to domestic abuse? Wearing a mask because of domestic abuse, the stigma of loneliness, understanding the relationship between loneliness and shame. How does loneliness impact us? Why do we need connection? Keeping company with ourselves. We're going to think about how do I treat myself and look at our internal dialogue. We're going to look at self-compassion as the way to be with ourselves. And practical ways we can practice self-compassion. There's an exercise called RAIN, which we'll look at later today. And lastly, signposting to organisations which can provide legal and practical support. Okay, first of all, you are not alone. I know I put in statistics at the beginning of most of my webinars, but I just think it's really important to remember you are not alone. Domestic abuse, very sadly and tragically, is very, very widespread. In the UK alone, almost 1 in 3 women between the ages of 16 and 59 will experience domestic abuse in their lifetimes. We know that 1 woman every 3 days is killed by a current or former partner in England and Wales alone. If you look at global statistics, it's absolutely terrifying how many women are killed by their partners globally. In the year ending March 2019, 1.6 billion women experienced domestic abuse. That will significantly have gone up during the pandemic. And remember, a lot of women do not report this to the police. So there are millions and millions of episodes of domestic abuse that go unreported. 90% of domestic abuse victims are women. So if you are watching this, please remember you are not alone. Experiencing domestic abuse is a very isolating experience, and we will look at that later, but you are not alone. And there's also a lot of shame that comes with domestic abuse, and that makes women feel more isolated. You're not alone in feeling that shame, and we'll look at that later today, but really important to remember you are not alone. In the 1980s, in a large survey in the USA, adults were asked, how many trusted friends do you have? And the average number was 3. In 2004, the answer was 0. So that's really quite shocking. And now, if I've done some research about loneliness and I've read quite a lot of articles about it, it's actually seen as a pandemic now. It's affecting more people than ever. So the answer remains the same. Most people feel they don't have any trusted friends, which is really, really sad. There's the health pandemic of COVID, there's the human rights pandemic of domestic abuse, and there's the mental health pandemic of loneliness. It's something that comes up a lot in the support groups I run. And actually, I was asked to do a workshop and a webinar on isolation and loneliness because so many women are affected by it. So if you are feeling lonely, you are not alone with that feeling, okay? We'll look later at the stigma that comes with feeling lonely. And please remember, you're not alone with that, okay? It's very, very common. And it's causing a lot of mental health problems, and especially during COVID, where people have been more isolated than ever. So if this relates to you, please, please, again, we come back to self-compassion. If someone is suffering, they need kindness. If you're suffering and feeling lonely, you need kindness. And the one thing we can do is start being kind to ourselves. If that's the only message you take from this webinar, I will be happy with that. Okay, so what actually is loneliness? Feeling lonely is different to being alone. So we all know the feeling of feeling alone in a crowd, that feeling at a party where everyone's chatting and you feel different, or you feel like uncomfortable and self-conscious or paranoid, you feel you don't fit in. I'm sure probably most human beings have had that feeling where you're surrounded by people but feel alone. We can be on our own also and feel the peace of solitude. So we can be on our own and not feel lonely. We can actually feel really peaceful. However, we can also be on our own and feel sad and disconnected from others. And we can be in a relationship and feel valued and loved, or we can be in a relationship and feel isolated and disconnected. And that's what many women say about domestic abuse, that although they might be with someone who's with them all the time and controlling them and keeping a very close eye on them, within that relationship, they actually feel incredibly isolated. We're going to be looking at how domestic abuse isolates us a bit later, but please, please have compassion for yourselves. It's a very lonely place to be in an abusive relationship. Also at this point, you might want to think about your childhood. Many women who come to Women's Trust also experienced abuse and neglect in their childhoods, and they often talk about feeling very lonely and isolated in their childhood, that no one validated them, no one asked how they were, that they were sort of invisible, or they were just not seen or not heard, or they're only there to be abused or to care for other people. So again, if that is you, please, please think of your younger child in you with love and compassion. We can be there for ourselves now, and that's what we're going to be looking at a lot today. So loneliness is a state of mind. It is not about where you physically are. You can be in a family, you can be in a relationship, you can be with people and feel lonely. It's a state of mind. It makes us feel sad, empty, unwanted. Some women talk about feeling untouchable, feeling different, feeling isolated, and it makes us feel disconnected. And that can be a really scary place to be, where we feel disconnected from the world around us and separate. And we'll be looking at the impact on our mental health later. For me, How I think about loneliness is, I think it's when you can't be your authentic self, when you can't be real, when you can't really be who you are, and you have to cover up or hide yourself away or shrink yourself down and not take up space. I think that's a very, very lonely place to be when you can't be your authentic self. So we'll be thinking a little bit about that as well today. Okay, moving on. How does loneliness relate to domestic abuse? Now, you can feel lonely and not be in an abusive relationship, but everyone here watching this today will have been. So we're going to look specifically at that. So we know that perpetrators isolate their victims. Now, one question I ask all women who come for an assessment at Women's Trust is I say, does your perpetrator isolate you? Or did they isolate you? And a lot of women answer that they didn't actually physically stop them from seeing other people, but they made them feel so guilty about seeing other people, or they made them feel so bad about themselves and so unconfident that they started self-isolating. So often it's a mixture where the perpetrator might actually isolate you, but also start self-isolating as well. So you might have to think about that. So how do perpetrators isolate their victims? They control who you see, and they often justify this by being protective or jealous. Um, that person's not good for you, they don't really care about you, they're a bad influence, or they're worried about you going out on your own, or they're worried about you going out in the dark. So it can come across as caring to begin with, and some people are quite flattered, that their partner's being very protective, and understandably that can feel really caring and quite nice. Even someone being jealous can make women feel quite special. But ultimately, this is all about controlling you. So it can start off feeling like care, and actually it's just really about controlling you. They might make you feel guilty or bad if you leave them alone. The sorts of comments I hear: I can't cope without you, I'll die if you leave me, I'll die without you, I need you here, that sort of thing. Often perpetrators can play the victim role, or they can sound like a sort of wounded child who you need to look after. So I hear a lot of women feel very responsible for their perpetrators, and they feel bad if they leave them on their own. The other way they do that is they chip away at your confidence, so you feel awful and you self-isolate. If you're repeatedly told that you're rubbish, crazy, stupid, thick, obviously you're not going to feel confident about going out socially. Domestic abuse causes depression and anxiety in at least 90% of victims. And depression also leads to self-isolating behavior, and so does anxiety. And it can also, and domestic abuse can also create social anxiety, fear of public transport, fear of leaving the house. And that makes it really hard then to go out of your comfort zone. Domestic abuse also makes us feel shame. We are not good enough to be part of the world, or we feel ashamed that we're still talking about it with our friends. We can feel like we're bad company. Women often say, I've just bored my friends by talking about domestic abuse, I've already ashamed. And then people say things like, if it's that bad, why don't you leave? Which is another really shaming question that people who don't understand trauma bonding will ask. And that leads to more isolating behavior. If you put that within the context of the pandemic, where we have actually been in a lockdown, where women have been told they can't go to work, you can't leave the house, you can't see people, you can see how this isolation and loneliness has got hugely magnified in the last year. So it's become a huge, huge issue. So please, please, again, if this relates to you, if any of this relates to you, please come back. We always come back to being kind to yourself. This is a very difficult and painful place to be, and a very difficult way to live. So please come back to self-kindness. Okay, more reasons why domestic abuse isolates us. If you are financially controlled or dependent on your partner, or financially abused, you may not have the money to do things by yourself. I've worked with a lot of women who don't have access to money. They're not allowed to have maybe an Oyster card. So they can't even get on a tube or a bus. It might be if a friend wants to meet you for coffee, you might feel really self-conscious if you can't pay. So there's that. The other thing to say is I work with a lot of women whose social events are sabotaged. So just as they're about to go out, their partner or whoever it is who's the abuser might pick an argument and make them feel really bad just before they're about to go out. And that's another thing that often happens. And then you don't want to go out or go to wherever it is you're going if you're feeling distressed or crying, or you've got a wound on you or something like that. So it's very normal as well for perpetrators to sabotage any sort of social event you're about to do. Domestic abuse attacks your sense of identity. You feel like you have no self. Women often talk about losing their identity, feeling empty. This is during the relationship and after as well. How women often describe is they say the perpetrator takes up all of the space and they've sort of shrunk to nothingness. So there's this void inside you and you feel empty and you've got nothing to say and you only feel defined by your perpetrator. And that is a result of trauma bonding as well. And then it's very hard to confidently go out into the world and sort of say, here I am, you know, it's impossible. Domestic abuse also makes the world a scary place. Our comfort zone shrinks and we don't trust the world or people, so we avoid people. If you can't trust your family, if you can't trust your partner, if these are the people who are abusing you, the very, very people who should be protecting you and loving you, if you can't trust them, then who can you trust? So this is what trauma does. It makes the world a really frightening place. It makes people untrustworthy. And so we avoid people. Also, trauma and abuse makes us feel like we are different. Many women describe feelings that they feel like freaks. They don't deserve to be in the world. They feel like outcasts. They feel like aliens. That's the sort of language I hear quite a lot. And that makes it really hard to then go out and mix with people. You know, going to Tesco's and buying a pint of milk becomes really, really hard when you feel like that, let alone going out and talking to people or going to a college course or an evening class or work. So domestic abuse does two things. It disconnects us from humanity and it disconnects us from ourselves. Okay. So that's trauma as well. We'll come back to this. Trauma disconnects us from ourselves. And the way to reconnect with yourself, we'll be looking at today, is through self-compassion. That is how you reconnect with yourself. It's through listening and paying attention to yourself. And so that's always what we come back to. If you feel disconnected from other people and if you feel disconnected from yourself, that's an incredibly painful place to be. It's really painful. It makes you feel very, very alone. It makes you feel, what's the point of me being on the world? A lot of women who I work with who feel like this also have a lot of shame and self-hatred. And so it makes being with yourself really unbearable, being with other people really unbearable. And so the world becomes a lonely, very painful place to be. And that's why women, I think about suicide as well. We'll look at that a bit later on. So if this is you, please, please have compassion for yourself. If you met someone else who felt disconnected in that way, I'm sure you'd only think of them with kindness and empathy. So please think of yourself like that too. It means you're really suffering. And when we're suffering, we need kindness. So moving on. So I'm having a glass of water. Okay, many women who I work with describe wearing a mask because of domestic abuse. This is often because of the shame of domestic abuse. It's also a survival strategy, just to say it's a survival strategy. It's because you might be being abused at home, but then you have to go to work or you have to do the school run, or you have to cope and survive, or you're meeting friends, or you're going to college, and you don't want to look like a victim, and you don't want to look like a mess, and you want to look like you're coping. And there's often a lot of shame. So you wear a mask to cover up. Now, Um, we'll look a bit more at mask wearing, because that again increases this sense of isolation. And this is why so many women feel alone when they're with people. It's because they're wearing a mask, because they're communicating, talking, being there, but other people aren't really seeing them. And that's a very lonely place to be. In all the groups I do, what's really beautiful about the group work is people start taking their masks off and they just are them. And they realize that they are lovable as they are and they're acceptable as they are. And that's very powerful, where you can be your authentic self and be valued for being your authentic self. That does not happen in domestic abuse. In domestic abuse, we are brainwashed by being given the repeated message, it is our fault. And we are the mad, bad, crazy ones, and something is wrong with us. So abuse is violating. I really believe it does brainwash us. Human beings, we're very sensitive and we absorb the environment we're in. And if we're in an abusive environment, it sort of penetrates us. We absorb the abuse, we start going in and changing the way we see ourselves. And we also try and make sense of the abuser's actions. And because the abuse is nonsensical, it's non-justifiable, it doesn't make sense. So the only way to rationalize it is to think it must be my fault, it must be me. So that makes women feel very self-conscious, like something's wrong with them, and they isolate even more. So loneliness is very common and normal in domestic abuse, but it's still often seen as something to be ashamed of. We may feel judged for it, like something is wrong with us if we have no friends. And social media also perpetuates the myth that we need thousands of followers and likes to be happy. Now, I'm not on social media, so I'm just talking about things I've read. I'm not on it for this very reason. I think, but I know a lot of people are on it and they find it really helpful. And there's obviously really good things about it too. But it can also make people feel, if you're watching someone else's life on Instagram and they're really popular and happy, surrounded by friends, getting loads of likes, going on great holidays, looking fabulous, it can understandably make us feel really rubbish about ourselves. And I think that being alone can become pathologized. Now, when I mean pathologized, I mean it can be seen by society as something that is wrong and shameful, and something to be embarrassed about, that everyone to be happy and successful needs to be surrounded by loads of people and be really be really popular. And of course, we know that's not true, because very sadly, quite often in the press, there'll be a suicide of a celebrity who seemed to have loads and loads of followers, but deep down was very, very lonely. So loneliness can happen to anyone. And connection, meaningful connection, isn't about how many people you're connected with. It's about the quality of the connection. It's about having quality connection. So one or two really good friends is far more important than having thousands of followers who don't really know you. But back to domestic abuse, the shame of domestic abuse also makes us feel even more stigmatized. And then we learn to hide our loneliness. So loneliness can be a stigma, and so can domestic abuse. And here's sorry, just going to this. Here's something which shows the cycle of loneliness and shame, which shows a little bit about the stigma. So at the top, you've got feelings of loneliness, and that might be because of the domestic abuse. You feel isolated and different. And then this might lead you to think there is something wrong with me because I feel lonely. I'm the problem, which is often a lot of women will feel like I'm the one with the issues, I'm the problem. And then the shame of the loneliness drives self-protecting behavior. So we start to isolate, and that shuts us off further from connection. And then we go back to the top, that increases our feelings of loneliness. So the more lonely we are, the more we feel something's wrong with us, and the more shamed we feel, and then the more we shut down. So you can get stuck in this sort of loop of loneliness and isolation. So back to the mask wearing, because it's all related. There's a stigma of loneliness, there's a stigma of domestic abuse. So we wear a mask, which allows us to cover up our pain and survive. We can go to work, we can do the school run, we can do food shopping, and no one else can see the suffering on the inside. I think this is also because there is a sort of emphasis on being positive, and if people ask how you are, you know, we want to say we're okay, and so we cover it up. Many women will describe themselves not just as wearing one mask, but lots of masks. And so think about whether this applies to you. Many women talk about being chameleons. They become what others want them to be. So women who've experienced domestic abuse, whether it's in their childhood or in their adulthood, are very, very good at reading other people. And you have to be good at reading other people to survive. So you're very good at becoming what others want you to be. Now, that's an incredible skill. So chameleons use that skill in nature to survive. It means that predators, you don't stand out to predators, you blend in. Yeah. So it's about protecting yourself. And in certain situations, it can be very helpful and useful. And it's very good to be able to be in tune with other people. But it could also leave you feeling very, very isolated, like no one knows the real you. So you go to work and you're your professional self, then then you'll be something else with other people, with your friends or with your children. And to some extent, we all do that. But what happens is when this becomes the only way you are, you lose sense with your core self, with your authentic self. And you end up being what other people want you to be and not knowing who you are inside. And so a lot of women will talk about this loss of identity, that they just become what other people want them to be and they don't know who they are on the inside. And then that's a lonely place to be, and it can be a frightening place to be, because when you are on your own, you're left with this emptiness of who am I? And you only feel defined in your relationships. You only feel defined when you're with other people. And that is partly because domestic abuse creates a sort of codependency where you feel you need a relationship to define yourself. So if you feel like you are a bit of a chameleon and you wear masks, that's understandable. It's a survival strategy and it can be very helpful. But we're going to be looking today at reconnecting with yourself on the inside. So the stigma of abuse and the social stigma of loneliness means we cover it up, but that makes us feel even more alone. Mask wearing allows us to function, but it's also very lonely, as no one else can see what we're going through and no one really knows us and no one sees us. That's a very painful place to be. This makes us feel very disconnected from others and ourselves. So we come back to this word disconnection. It's really important when we think about loneliness. We're disconnected from others and we're also disconnected from ourselves. So when we're with other people, we feel alone. And when we're with ourselves, we also feel alone because we don't know ourselves. And that can be a really frightening place to be. If this refers to you, please come back to self-kindness. We're going to look at shame. There's nothing to be, you have nothing to be ashamed of. The abuse is not your fault. And the fact that you wore masks was you being clever, it was you surviving, okay? There's nothing wrong with that, but it does have an impact on how you see yourself, okay? So we always come back to self-kindness. Now, I would be usually waving around a book if I was doing a workshop. You could see the book. There's a book I'm going to refer to called Lost Connections. It's in the reading list at the end by Johann Hari. And he has done a lot of research about loneliness. And he quotes a man called John Cacipo, I think it's called. And he's a loneliness expert. He's a psychologist who has studied loneliness for years. So he's the leading expert on loneliness and has researched it for years. Now, I'm going to read out something that to you might sound very, very obvious, but actually when he did this research, it was quite groundbreaking. So he found that loneliness, lack of meaningful connection with others, causes depression, rather than depression is caused by brain chemistry. Now, this is quite groundbreaking. Because depression, many of you, when you have depression, are given antidepressants, and they might be really helpful, and that's a good thing. So this isn't to say antidepressants don't work, but depression has tended to be seen as something is wrong with your brain chemistry. You're lacking in serotonin and you need a chemical to balance it out. What John Casapo found out was that loneliness was actually the major cause of depression. And so he found out that if you treat the loneliness, the depression is treated. And that was quite sort of groundbreaking. So he also found this out, which I think is really important to think about. He discovered that loneliness causes a huge increase in the production of cortisol, and that loneliness is as stressful as experiencing a physical attack. Now, how he did that is he did this test where he tested people's saliva, people who scored high on feeling lonely. He tested their saliva and they all had far more cortisol in their bodies than people who said they weren't lonely. Now, cortisol is the fight or flight sort of hormone that comes out when you're under attack. Okay, so loneliness, and the amounts of cortisol was so huge that it was as stressful as experiencing a physical attack. So loneliness has a huge impact on us physically as well. It can actually make us feel traumatized. It actually has a really profound effect on us physically. It can make us feel we're in that fight or flight, panicky mode where we've got cortisol sort of coursing through us. So again, if you experience loneliness, if you experience depression, it might be about loneliness, it might be about disconnection. You're not alone. Depression affects such a huge percentage of the population. And now, because of the pandemic, it's affecting more people than ever. And isolation and loneliness is one of the major causes of it. So we're going to think about how we can reconnect with ourselves primarily, and also how we can reconnect with others. If you have experienced loneliness and isolation for a long time, please, please be really super kind to yourself. Remember, it's as stressful as experiencing a physical attack. Now, you're all here because you've experienced domestic abuse and you know how stressful that is. If you have loneliness on top of it, you're experiencing so much stress, okay? So how does loneliness impact us? We know it causes depression, and we know that at least 90% of women who've experienced domestic abuse experience depression and anxiety. And loneliness is a big part of that picture. Loneliness also increases low self-esteem, paranoia, sense of feeling different and not belonging, self-neglect. We have less healthy habits. If no one can see us, we feel we're invisible. It doesn't matter if we eat badly. It doesn't matter if we don't wash. It doesn't matter if we don't go to bed on time. So poor sleeping, it really increases risk of suicide. And there's no stigma about that, okay? If we'll, the Samaritans helpline is at the end of this webinar. So yeah, if that's a very normal response to feeling lonely, and it's a very normal response to domestic abuse as well. It massively increases stress levels, as we've just seen, huge spikes in cortisol. And when we're lonely, we're far more likely to use drug and alcohol to self-comfort because we have no one around us to self-comfort. We're left with the loneliness within ourselves, so we're more likely to turn to addictive behavior. So again, be really kind to yourself if that's you, okay? You're suffering and you're just trying to comfort yourself, which is entirely understandable. Decreased memory and learning. When we're lonely, it affects us cognitively because we're so stressed. Also leads to poor decision making. You stop trusting yourself and your ability to make decisions. And it has a big impact on physical health. People who are lonely are far more likely to get more serious health issues. We need companionship. We need affection to live. So if you relate to any of those, again, we come back to self-compassion. This is suffering, that list there. You wouldn't wish on anyone else, but you might well be living with all those symptoms yourself. So please, please be kind to yourself. As I look at that list, I can see it very clearly they're also symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's a big overlap here. When you have trauma, you often feel very, very alone with your trauma. And so there's a big overlap between trauma and loneliness. And so you might have these symptoms because of the trauma of domestic abuse, and then that causes you to isolate. And that means the trauma becomes more intense. So again, we come back to self-compassion. Okay, so the link between loneliness and mental health. Mental ill health has made me alone and isolated, and feeling lonely and isolated impacts on my mental health. So you can see there the sort of vicious circle you can get into. Your mental health gets impacted, you feel rubbish, you're more likely to isolate, you become more lonely. That makes you feel more depressed and anxious, and we get caught up in this loop. And there's another visual there, so which explains it a bit more. So loneliness at the top makes you feel uncomfortable around others, it affects your confidence. You might then avoid people. It says unappealing behaviors. That might be you turn to drugs and alcohol or addictive behavior. You might have self-defeating thoughts that you're rubbish, no one likes you, you're not worth getting to know, you don't belong in the world, you don't deserve love. This is more likely to lead to depression. When it says negative interpersonal behavior, that'd be more avoiding people, isolating, staying in. And then what can happen is other people can start avoiding you as well, because they sort of think, well, you know, she never comes out, she doesn't want to see anyone, I'll just leave her alone. I've asked her out loads of times and she keeps saying no, so I'll just leave her. And that increases the loneliness as well. So also our loneliness can also it affects how we feel about ourselves. It can also affect how other people respond to us as well. They can start pulling away from us. So if you recognize this cycle, please be kind to yourself. How we can think about breaking this cycle is the bit where it says self-defeating thoughts at the bottom. That's what we're going to be looking at today. Okay. How can we start thinking about ourselves with more kindness? How can we start being with ourselves with love and compassion? Because if you do that, you can hopefully start breaking this cycle, and that can help with the depression. Now, we haven't got much time, but we'll have a think about this. Okay, so earlier I was saying how stressful loneliness is, and this is one reason why it is so stressful. So the book I'm referring to, Lost Connections by Johann Hari, it's a really, really excellent book on depression and a lot about loneliness as well. And it's about the importance of human connection. You can get it on audio. I know for a lot of people with trauma, it's very hard to read. It's quite widely available at libraries as well. And I think it's also on Audible if you want to listen to it. I really recommend it. I think it's a really excellent book on depression and how humans need meaningful connection in their lives to heal. And he explains this, that very basically humans first evolved in the savannas of Africa in small hunter-gatherer tribes. Now we only exist today because these humans were clever enough to work out how to cooperate. They shared food and they looked after the sick and they protected each other from predators. So on a really basic fundamental level, we're only here because people have learned how to share and look after each other and protect each other. If you don't have that, if you got separated from your tribe, it was catastrophic because it meant you were vulnerable. If you got sick, no one was going to look after you. If predators came, if a wolf came and attacked you, there's no one to guard you. So this feeling of feeling vulnerable and feeling awful was a signal. You need to get back to your tribe. Okay, so the book is saying humans need tribes. It's not saying you can't be on your own. Of course, I very much like my own company. I like being on my own, but I'm very aware I also need contact. I also need connection. So humans need tribes like bees need hives, okay? We need connection to feel part of the world. Now, some people need more connection to others. We're looking a little bit about different types of connection. But you can see that's why it's so stressful to be on your own, because there's no one to look after you. There's no one to protect you. There's no one to share with. You literally feel like you might not survive. And it's only very recently that we now live in this far more isolated world. But I believe that in a way, we still need tribes. Um, now your family might be the tribe you're born into, and sadly, they might not have been a good tribe. They might not have been kind and supportive, and they might not have protected you. And that's really tough. So if that's your experience, we come back to self-compassion. My hope is, my belief is that if we can heal by connecting to ourselves and bringing self-compassion to our lives, that then we can start connecting with other people who respect us and value us. And we can start forming a different sort of tribe as we get older, a tribe where we are valued and respected. That takes time, it's not, and often there's a large period of loneliness just after domestic abuse, where you might be very alone after the domestic abuse because you've lost all your friends and family because you've been isolated. You might find that the friends and family you have are also abusive. You might start seeing them in that light as well. And you might have to make choices about who to let go of in your life. A lot of women I'm working with in the support groups are sort of making those sorts of decisions. Do I want someone in my life who doesn't respect my boundaries? It's a really big question. And so often there can be a lot of loneliness at this time when you just come out of the relationship. And it can take a lot of time to meet and connect with other people. So please, please be compassionate with yourself and very, very patient. It's really important to be patient. Okay, so the paradox of healing from the trauma of domestic abuse is this. When we have experienced human cruelty in the form of abuse, we understandably want to isolate as we no longer trust humanity. And that's what happens when you have post-traumatic stress disorder caused by domestic abuse. The worst type of trauma is when it's human caused because we lose our faith in humanity. And so understandably, we want to isolate. However, that isolation leaves us very vulnerable and it leaves us suffering alone with our trauma. And sadly, so you isolate to protect, but actually the isolation can leave us very vulnerable to other perpetrators who can then come along and love bomb us and give us the attention when we feel most alone and unseen. Now, this might not apply to you, but many women I work with talk about this. They might leave an abusive family or leave an abusive relationship, and they might sort of bring up the barriers and go, right, I'm not going to trust anyone. I'm just going to survive by myself because human beings hurt and they're cruel. And this all might be done unconsciously. Okay, you're not actively maybe thinking this through in your head, but this just might be what you automatically do. And understandably, you isolate. But then because we're human beings and we crave connection, suddenly a charming person can come along, love bomb us, make us feel special, and give us all that attention and affection that really we've been craving. And then that can make us very vulnerable to other people, to perpetrators, and we can get back into the cycle of abuse. It doesn't happen to everyone, but it can happen. So it's just something to be aware of. Now back to connections. To end loneliness, we need meaningful and authentic connections. We need warmth, touch, and to be loved and accepted for who we are. Now, this can be very hard. I'm saying these words, and they might be very painful for some of you who do not have those things. Be kind to yourself if you don't have them. What we're going to be thinking about today is we don't always have people around who do that for us, okay? But we can make a choice that we can try and do it for ourselves. We can show warmth and love and acceptance to ourselves. And that is a choice we can make. I know it's a difficult choice if you're feeling full of shame and self-hatred. It's really important we think about how we are with ourselves. Now, it can be very hard, especially during this COVID pandemic, to make meaningful connection with others. However, we can start with making meaningful connection to ourselves. One of the things that comes up a lot in my work is women will say things like, I feel like I want another relationship. I've just come out of an abusive relationship and I feel like I want another relationship. It makes me feel better and comfort. And often the feedback they will get from other women is, before you do that, how about working on the relationship with yourself? And I think that's really valuable to think about. Before you think about your relationships with other people, think about your relationship with yourself. Now, in the book Lost Connections, Johann Hari says there are 4 main connections that we need. Connection to self. This is understanding, validating ourselves. And this is the primary one. And we're going to be looking at this today. How do we connect with ourselves? He also talks about connecting to meaning. This is the values in your life, your values, your personal values. What are they and how can you connect to them? Connecting to nature. In all the research he's done on depression, and he's written this book about depression after years of research, it was shown that people who were connected to nature had less depression. Now, I know we live in a city. I live in a pretty built up part of London, but I try and get to a park, even if I just look at a blossom tree or some birds. I really find it really helps me. So even in small ways, just connecting to nature is really important for our mental health. And lastly, connection to others. This can come later. First of all, in this, we're going to be thinking about our connection with ourselves. Most women I work with become so connected to others through the trauma bonding of domestic abuse that they lose contact with themselves. So before we think about connection with others, we're going to be thinking about connections with ourselves first. Okay, how can we connect with ourselves? Now, this sounds like a really obvious thing to say. Wait, when you are with no one else, you are not a no one. I work with a lot of women who feel like when they're on their own, they just become a nothing. Domestic abuse leaves us feeling as if we are defined by other people. So I want to say you are not a no one, you are a someone. Even if you're on your own and no one can see you, you still exist. You are someone, and you can think about spending time with yourself. So rather than thinking I'm alone, you can think about I'm not alone, I'm with me. I'm with me, and I'm going to get to know me. I'm going to be interested in me. So we're going to think about, how do I treat myself? When I'm on my own, how do I treat myself? Now, most women I work with are really hard on themselves, and they're automatically really kind to other people, but really tough on themselves. So we're going to just try and think about, would you treat other people the way you treat yourself? Do you compare other people? If a friend was suffering, how do you treat her? We're going to look at a little bit of this. So we can think about this. Is my inner voice compassionate or critical? Do you enjoy your own company? Are you kind to yourself? So think about the following statements. I'm disapproving and judgmental about my own flaws and inadequacies. When I'm feeling down, I tend to obsess and fixate on everything that's wrong. Usually what's wrong with me, I should have added there. When things are going badly for me, I think it's my fault. When times are really difficult, I tend to be tough on myself. I'm intolerant and impatient towards those aspects of my personality I don't like. When I'm feeling down, I tend to feel like most people are probably happier than I am. So that's about sort of comparing yourself to others and seeing yourself in an unfavorable light. Now, if you relate to these, you're being really hard on yourself, and you probably have a very judgmental internal voice that judges you and is permanently evaluating you. You know, you should have done this by now, you should have done that, you should have achieved this, you should be earning this, you should have got a flat, you should have done this, everyone else is doing better than you. That sort of voice. If you make a mistake, you're really, really tough on yourself. And it's sort of, if you make a mistake, it's mortifying and you're a failure. So if you think like that, you're really, really hard on yourself. Most women I work with automatically think about themselves like this. And this is because they've been living with someone who has been subtly or overtly putting them down, for a very long time, because that's what domestic abuse does. And so women I work with have internalized the voice of their perpetrator or perpetrators. That can be from their childhood or their adulthood. And so women I work with are usually very, very tough on themselves. Okay, now what we're going to do now is we're actually going to take a little break. So I'm going... Okay, so returning to what is compassion and what is self-compassion. We are thinking now about how can we connect with ourselves? How can we connect with our authentic selves? So the word compassion comes from the Latin word compati, which means suffer with. So one way to think about this is when you are on your own, you're not alone, you are with you. Think about you and you are with you, okay? Now, if you don't like yourself, and if you're full of pain, then being alone with yourself might feel really overwhelming and frightening. So one way to help us be with ourselves is to bring compassion in, and then it makes it less frightening, okay? So compassion is the ability to show empathy, love, and concern to people who are suffering and in difficulty. So self-compassion is simply the ability to direct these same emotions to ourselves when we are suffering. Many of you watching this will naturally show compassion to others, but find it hard to show yourself that same compassion. So, why is self-compassion important after domestic abuse? Living with domestic abuse has a huge impact on our self-worth. Abuse, whether it is physical, psychological, or sexual, means we are treated with disrespect repeatedly and often long-term. If we are repeatedly treated like we are worthless, we start to believe it. If we believe we are worthless, we don't believe we deserve to be treated with love and respect. So we start to treat ourselves in the same way the abuser treats us, as if we are unworthy of kindness and understanding. So the impact of domestic abuse on our sense of self. And now I've done this in other webinars, so I won't dwell on it too long, but I think it's worth recapping. Most people who experience domestic abuse are told or made to feel the following: it's your fault. You're crazy, you're messed up, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're worthless, you're invisible, your feelings don't matter. Even if they don't say that to you out loud, the behavior of abuse, being abused, makes you feel like that. Those are the messages that you will internalize if you experience domestic abuse. And remember, domestic abuse is not a one-off, it's long-term, it's repeated. It's often very subtle. It's the death by 1,000 cuts. So verbal abuse, if things are said out loud, leads this sort of brainwashing I talked about earlier, and the loss of self. You're stupid, you're thick, you're crazy, mad. So you start doubting your sanity, your cognitive abilities, your sexuality. You're called slag, slut, whore, cold, frigid, uptight, abnormal. By the way, these are all words that women have come up in groups I run. These are things that are repeated all the time. If we talk about the sort of thing women hear, these are the sorts of things that come up all the time. And there'll be others more specific to you as well, but these are the general ones. So your femininity is attacked, your physical appearance, you're ugly, you're too thin, you're too fat, you're too large, you're too small. Your confidence is attacked. You're useless, you're incapable, you're incompetent. Your social skills, no one really likes you, they're just using you, they're only after one thing. So it erodes your trust in other people, it erodes your trust in yourself. And also the one thing you might think you can do is be a mum, and then that will be challenged too. You're too messed up to be a good mum, you've got issues, you're a bad cook, you're not good enough, that sort of thing. And then there's the gaslighting, which makes women not trust themselves or their reality. So the gaslighting is when your reality is denied, and you start feeling like you're going mad. And often women have so much self-doubt after abusive relationships, and they think, is it my fault? Did it really happen? Is it me? So every aspect of your identity is attacked. Now, if every aspect of your identity is attacked, when you're left alone, you're left with a you that can feel broken, damaged, and not easy to be around. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to be with you when you feel like that. So again, we come back to this, the letting go of shame and replacing with self-compassion. If you've been taught to like that, it's normal and if you've been treated like that, it's normal and understandable to feel shame after abuse. But this will just keep you feeling like something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. You did not abuse anyone, and the abuse you experienced was not your fault. The abuser is an adult who knows the difference between right and wrong, and they chose to abuse. And this is why they do what they do in secret, and they're so often charming in public. The abuser wanted to control you and make you scared and dependent on them. The abuser should carry the shame because they have been cruel and abusive. When we replace shame with self-compassion and self-understanding, we start to heal and regain our sense of self and our self-respect. So I put this in because if you have a lot of shame, it's then really hard to enjoy your own company. It becomes impossible. You're with yourself and you're shaming yourself and you feel ashamed. If we can replace the shame, if we can give the shame back to the abuser because they're the person who should carry the shame, and if you can replace it with self-compassion and look at yourself without any judgment whatsoever, if you can do that, you can start reconnecting with yourself. And then when you are with you can actually start maybe even enjoying your own company. And that might feel a while off yet, but we'll look at how we can do that. So most of us have an internal voice that we can hear evaluating and judging our behavior. If we have healthy self-esteem, our internal voice is more likely to be kind and encouraging. If we have experienced domestic abuse, it is very normal to have internalized the voice or voices of the abuser. We can try and identify the way we talk to and treat ourselves. We can understand where our critical voice comes from, and we can also try and introduce a kinder, more forgiving internal voice. Okay, so again, we're thinking, what do we like how do I treat me? How do I treat me? I want you all to think about that. When I'm by myself, how do I treat myself? Okay, now, internal safety and healing. This is really important. Domestic abuse makes us feel unsafe. When we're treading on eggshells, we can't relax and feel unsafe. So most women say, I feel like I'm treading on eggshells. We need to feel safe if we are to heal. So I'm talking about self-compassion. It's important because it helps us see ourselves without judgment. And when we do that, we also create safety within ourselves. So this is one thing we want to think about. If we're trying to heal, we need to try and create a safe place within us. If we beat ourselves up all the time, we're not creating internal safety, but more anxiety and shame. Okay? It's so important we try and break the cycle of shame. Every time you criticize yourself, every time you beat yourself up, you are shaming yourself more. And that's going to create more depression, more anxiety, more self-destructive behavior. Okay? Many women say things like, I don't want to let myself off the hook. I have to take responsibility for what I did. Yes, as adults, I agree. We all need to take responsibility for the choices we have made. But it is not our faults. It is not your fault that you were abused. It's really important to put the shame back where it belongs. You may have been vulnerable. You may have been sad. You may have been depressed. That does not justify the abuser's behavior. We all have issues. Maybe you had issues from your childhood. We all have issues. That does not justify abuse. Okay, so we're trying to break the cycle of self-shaming and create a safer internal place with us. Do you want to be with someone who's going to beat you up? No. So it's really important you don't beat yourself up. Okay, you deserve to be treated with kindness. That's your human right. So if we beat ourselves up, we are not creating internal safety, but more anxiety and shame. So self-compassion is about helping us feel safer within ourselves. When we're kind to ourselves, when we accept ourselves, when we take the pressure off, when we stop comparing ourselves to others and beating ourselves up and saying we should have done this, we should have done that, when we take all of that sort of language away and are just kind and gentle and patient with ourselves, we allow ourselves to relax. We take the pressure off. And when we relax, we can actually get to know ourselves. We can heal and we can be with ourselves, and actually it can be a much more pleasant experience. So would you like to spend time with someone who treated you in the way you treat yourself? Okay. Would you treat someone else who is suffering in the same way you treat yourself? I doubt it. So we're going to think, how can I make it more pleasant and safe and relaxing to be with me? Okay, this is how we reconnect with ourselves, reconnect with our values, reconnect with our creativity, reconnect with our souls, and then we get to know ourselves. Okay, and then when we're alone, we can at least be okay with ourselves. And the more you love and respect and value yourself, when you are able to go out into the world and connect with others, you'll have more boundaries, and other people will respect you back. Okay. So, how do you treat a friend? Instead of mercilessly judging, criticizing yourself for various inadequacies or shortcomings, self-compassion means you are kind and understanding when confronted with personal failings. After all, whoever said you were supposed to be perfect? So let go of being perfect. No one is perfect. Allow yourself to make mistakes. Think about a time when a close friend felt really bad about themselves, was really struggling in some way. How do you respond to your friend in this situation? Now think about the times when you feel bad about yourself or struggling. How do you typically respond to yourself in these situations? What is the tone in which you talk to yourself? Did you notice a difference? If so, ask yourself why. What factors or fears come into play that lead you to treat yourself and others so differently? Most women I work with have a different set of rules for themselves. Everyone else, they can be kind and patient to, really super understanding. But when it comes to themselves, it's a whole other set of rules. You have to be perfect. You have to behave. You have to get it right first time. You're not allowed to change your mind. You're not allowed to be weak. You're not allowed to ask for help. Those sorts of things. How do you think things might change if you responded to yourself in the same way you typically respond to a close friend when you're suffering? So this is about you being a friend to yourself. You might not have a tribe around you. You might be very, very isolated right now. Many, many people are, because of the pandemic and because of domestic abuse. But you can think about being a good friend to yourself. I know it sounds sort of basic, but believe me, it's the fundamentals. If you can start being kinder to yourself, you're saying something so important. You're saying, I matter. I deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. You are undoing all the cruelty you've been treated with. You are changing the record, internally. You're changing your neural pathways. It's the most important thing you can do is start being kind to yourself. Okay. Now I put this in a lot of workshops and webinars, but I always think it's useful to come back to. Impacts of abuse and conditions of worth. Unconditional love is when we are loved for who we are, no matter what we do. Okay, doesn't mean that if we behave badly, that's okay. It's not about giving yourself a free pass to behave badly. It's about being loved for who you are, being loved for your authentic self. Conditional love is when we are loved for doing what other people want us to do. Each of us has our own conditions of worth. So how do you finish this sentence? If I'm to be valued and loved, I must. I think about the messages you've had from other people who've abused you or controlled you. If I'm to be valued and loved, I must take care of others, work hard, not make a noise, be invisible, never ask for help, never cry, or never ask for anything. Never get angry, never complain, please others, sacrifice myself for others. Be good, behave, be silent, be small, be the best. Don't be too successful, do as I'm told. Be clever, don't be too clever, maybe though. Don't be proud of yourself, be strong, keep secrets. Don't ask for help, don't be vulnerable, don't be loud, don't speak out, don't disagree, don't argue, don't challenge, don't defend yourself, don't make boundaries. Be compliant, maybe, be perfect. Don't make mistakes. Put others first. Be thinner, be curvier, be pretty. Get top grades at school. Be subservient. Now, as I read out that list, I feel exhausted and depressed as I read that out. It's a list of really tough rules that many of us growing up or in abusive relationships will just absorb those rules, and then we keep those rules for ourselves. And that's why being on our own can be such hard work, because if we have all these internal unconscious rules that we're carrying around in us, it makes it really hard. Because what happens if you don't do well at something? What happens if you do speak out? What happens if you make a mistake? You then beat yourself up and you're really, really hard on yourself. So we're going to try and think about unconditional love, radical unconditional acceptance of who you are. That you can love yourself even if you make mistakes. You can love yourself when you're weak. You can love yourself when you're vulnerable. You can love yourself when you look a mess. You can love yourself when you have a bad day at work. You can love yourself when you mess up. Yeah. Self-compassion is about unconditional acceptance of who you are. Think about the word radical acceptance, radical non-judgment. It's really, really important. It does not depend on behaving or being a certain way. Okay. So that's something to think about. If you have these rules for yourself, it makes it really stressful being with yourself. So here is a lovely exercise to develop self-awareness. This is a little practical tool you can take with you. So we talked earlier about trying to break cycles of negative thinking. We beat ourselves up. We're thinking about how we can create new neural pathways. This is about how we can reconnect with ourselves, our inner wisdom and compassion. We want to move from unconscious automatic behavior to conscious awareness of the self. And when we bring that conscious awareness of the self, we can then start showing compassion to ourselves. So RAIN stands for the following. The R stands for recognize without judgment. I'll give an example of this in a minute of how we apply it. But the R stands for recognize without judgment, really, really important. The allow and accept. Sorry, the A is for allow and accept without judgment. The I is investigate without judgment. And the N is nurture, unconditional love without judgment. So look, without judgment in big capital letters, we're taking away all the judgment here. We're coming back to being with yourself consciously. Now you might want to use this at different times. It's commonly used in addiction, actually. Anything where there's some compulsive behavior. So it might be a lot of women who come to Women's Trust, maybe they might comfort themselves with food, okay? And that's been a huge issue in COVID. And then you comfort yourself with food, and then you feel ashamed of yourself because you've overeaten, then you feel unattractive, and you isolate, okay? It might be you use this at a time when you're feeling really panicky and you're beating yourself up. It might be at a time when you're just feeling really, really depressed, okay? So you can use this exercise just to sort of bring consciousness and awareness to your behavior, okay? What I will do is I will focus on an example of doing something. So it might be that you're about to ring up your ex because you just want connection. We're just going to look at the eating right now, because that's something that's come up a lot. And when women are isolated, they can often turn to food. So you're feeling rubbish, but you might not even be aware you're feeling rubbish. You just notice that you just thinking about the big chocolate cake you brought in the supermarket, and it's in the fridge. And you're about to go to the fridge and you want to eat the whole thing as a way probably of avoiding connection with yourself. what we're going to think about now is how can we connect with ourselves in that moment. So we're going to think about recognizing without judgment. So recognizing is just bringing consciousness to your behavior, whatever your behavior is, whether you're about to go online and see what your ex-boyfriend's up to, whether you're just feeling rubbish and you're about to self-harm in some way. Recognize without judgment what you're doing. This might be simply saying, I'm feeling rubbish. I feel crap. I hate myself right now. And I'm about to eat a massive chocolate cake just because I can. Recognize what you're about to do. Okay, just recognize what's happening without any judgment. Okay, this is about you just looking at yourself without judgment. And then you allow and you accept that without judgment. So don't beat yourself up about the fact you're going to eat a big chocolate cake. Just allow it, just accept it. This is what I'm doing without any judgment. Okay. As soon as you start judging yourself, you're letting shame back in. Okay. And we don't want shame in, we want shame out. All right. And then we investigate without judgment. And the investigate is asking yourself, why am I doing this? What's going on? You do it without any criticism, without any judgment. Why am I behaving like this? Why am I doing this? So this RAIN exercise is probably most helpful, I guess, around behavioral things, but it's also helpful around mood as well. Investigate what's going on. Why am I feeling like this? Why am I feeling anxious? Why am I feeling depressed? Why am I feeling sad? Why am I feeling like I want to swallow my feelings with food? And then you investigate why, okay? And I want you to think about trauma. Yeah, maybe I'm doing this because I'm really lonely and I'm really sad and I need comfort. Okay, it's probably that basic that you need comfort. You're doing this behavior to comfort yourself. Why do I need comfort? I need comfort because I've been traumatized by abuse. I was abused as a little girl. Maybe there's a little girl in me that's really sad. Maybe there's an adult in me that's really grieving the fact I've lost my partner and the family I always wanted. Once you start investigating, this is about putting a pause in your day. It's about pausing and investigating how you are without any judgment. And when you start doing that, what I want you then to do is nurture yourself. Okay, I'm feeling really, really sad and I want to obliterate my feelings by eating. And I'm feeling rubbish and I hate myself right now and I'm feeling revolted with myself. And I feel like a failure and I feel like absolute shit. And I've messed up everything because I've hidden away from all my friends and I've been really angry at work today because I just exploded because I can't take any more. And I'm exhausted because I haven't slept for days because every night I go to sleep, I have a nightmare. I have flashbacks. Yeah. Or I overslept today and I feel terrible about that. Investigate without any judgment. And what you will find is that you're suffering. Yeah. You're suffering in some way. If you're suffering, what do you need? You need unconditional love and kindness. And so then you nurture yourself. Now, the nurturing bit is difficult if you feel you don't deserve it. Okay. So sometimes you've got to fake it until you make it. All right. Just think, what would I do for a friend who was feeling like this? What would I do for a friend? Would I beat them up and judge them? No, I wouldn't do that. I'd be really kind to them. We might do something practical. You might make them a cup of tea. You might sit them down and put a blanket around them because they might be really cold and shivery. Your friend might at this point be having a really good cry because when you start investigating why, if you recognize that you're suffering, you probably might start crying and then you need love. So this is about giving yourself unconditional love without judgment. It's about nurturing. Some women imagine a really good friend. Some people didn't have much parenting, so they might try and imagine what would it be like if I had a really nice parent who looked after me right now? What would they say? Yeah. And if you didn't have that, again, you come back to self-compassion. That's really tough. This is about you soothing yourself and being really kind to yourself because when you do that, you break the cycle of shame. And when you start valuing yourself, you start respecting yourself. And when you do that, you actually believe you deserve a place in the world. And then you start believing you deserve connection. And then that makes, if you go out in the world and meet people, it means you're more likely to have relationships with people who respect you. So RAIN is really simple, okay? Recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And I did this with one woman who found self-compassion so hard. And she liked the word rain. It was like rain, love raining down on her. Yeah, just think of it like that, completely without judgment. Okay, more exercises you can do to start practice being with yourself with love. Now, some women really like this. I think this is really beautiful, very simple. When you notice you're under stress, if you're alone and you're feeling rubbish and lonely and isolated, this is about you giving yourself loving touch. We talked earlier about how human beings need warmth and affection and love to survive, okay? So if you notice you're feeling lonely, and we know that being lonely causes cortisol to rush through us, and we feel more stressed, maybe start by just bringing some attention to your breathing. We all shallow breathe if we have trauma. So try and breathe through your nose, deep breaths down through your body. Maybe take 2 or 3 deep breaths, and then gently place your hand over your heart and feel your body, feel the gentle pressure and warmth of your hand. If you wish, you can place 2 hands on your chest. Notice the difference of feeling. What do you prefer? This is about your choices. Feel the touch of your hands on your chest. Try and bring loving touch to yourself. A lot of women I work with have very complex relationships with their bodies. If there's been sexual abuse or physical abuse as well, or actually any abuse, you can feel that your body doesn't deserve love. And if there's trauma, a lot of trauma is stored in your body. So this is about you touching your body with love very gently. If you wish, you could place your hand on your heart. Feel your heart beating, feel your humanity. Feel the natural rising and falling of your chest as you breathe in and as you breathe out. You can just stay with that feeling as long as you like. If you want to, you can say to yourself either out loud or just in your head, I'm here with you, I'm staying with you. And the staying with you is really important. When you say I'm staying with you, you're connecting to yourself. Think about staying loyal to yourself. Most women I work with are so loyal to their perpetrators, whether it's their parents or their partners. They will stay with them rather than themselves. This is about you showing loyalty to yourself and not abandoning yourself. Now, the word abandon is a big word, and many women I work with would identify with having abandonment issues, where they're abandoned as children. And that doesn't necessarily mean physically, it might be they felt abandoned sort of more psychologically. And domestic abuse, there's often a lot of abandonment within domestic abuse. Yeah. This is about you not abandoning yourself, but staying with yourself. This is about making it okay for you to be with you. So hand on heart, feel your breathing, connect with your humanity, connect with the life force within you. So I'm here with you, I'm staying with you. You might find you get tearful when you do this, that's fine. It's good. Movement is good, okay? When there's trauma and abuse, we freeze, okay? We freeze to survive. You freeze to survive the abuse. When you start healing, you start thawing, you start melting. So it's very normal to have lots of tears, okay? So you stay with the tears with love and kindness. We come back to that unconditional love, no judgment. Let the tears out if there are tears, and just stay with self-compassion, okay? So hand on your heart, staying with you. And that can be a really good exercise to do at any time you're feeling stressed, depressed, anxious. It can be very grounding. I'm here with you. This is about saying, I'm on your side. This is about you being on your side. Yeah, I've got you. I've got this. I've got you. Yeah. Many women say they feel that no one's got their back, and that's a really painful place to be, that no one has got your back. This is about saying, I'm here for me. I'm here, I'm showing up for me, and I'm going to not abandon myself. I'm going to stay with myself. Okay, there's a lot of power in doing that. One last exercise to do when you've gone through domestic abuse. We're talking about loneliness here. Being lonely is really tough, being on your own, because when you're on your own, there's the pain. And many women keep super, super, super busy so they can avoid the pain. And so when you are on your own, you just have this unbelievable pain. But when you're really, really, really busy, you're avoiding that pain. And you might be being with other people, but not really being authentic with other people because you're hiding your pain. So you're hiding your pain from other people, you're hiding your pain from yourself. Now, this is why I love the group work I do, because in groups, people share their pain. They're not alone with their pain, and you can be your authentic self. Yeah. But if you're not in a group and you're on your own, which we all are at times in our lives, if you're on your own, it's that learning to be with your pain. So this is a really useful exercise. Imagine if your pain was in a physical form and it came and sat next to you. How would you treat it? Would you run away from it? Would you turn around and shame it and ask, are you still here? Would you ask it to leave? Leave me alone. Would you judge it? I'm sure you probably would. Most women judge it. Why are you still here? You should be better by now. You cheer up. That sort of behavior. Would you treat a friend like that? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't treat their pain like that. So we're going to think about being with our pain in a different way. Imagine your pain and it comes and sits next to you. You might feel scared of it and you might keep running from it, but it doesn't make it go away. This is about turning around, looking at your pain and being interested in it with kind attention. Ask yourself how you are. Ask your pain how it is. Try and take time to understand it. This is back to the rain. Recognize your pain, allow it and accept it, and then investigate it. Investigate it. Why? Why are you feeling like this? Take time to understand it. Would you listen to it and pay it some kind of attention? That's what you do to a friend. Pay it kind attention, listen to your pain. And then we come to the rain again, the N for nurture. We're going to think about comforting your pain, accepting your pain. Maybe think about giving yourself a hug. What does that feel like energetically? Giving yourself a hug. Some women might remember that they might have had a granny or a teacher who was kind to them. Remember that sort of quality. Did you have a kind granny who maybe stroked your head when you were sad? You might want to stroke your head. Think about yourself with kindness. What do you need? Do you need to rest? Do you need to cancel an arrangement and just relax and have a bath? Or do you need to, just comfort yourself and watch a bit of comedy on TV? What do you need? Think about nurturing. Think about at this point what you might do for a little sad child, because a lot of us are carrying our sad inner child. You wouldn't tell them off if a little girl was sitting next to you crying. You'd probably give it a hug. Okay, you wouldn't ignore it and go off and look after someone else. Think about the you that's crying out for attention and try and give yourself that love. So self-compassion is about understanding your suffering. And if you feel this feels too self-indulgent, this is actually about you honoring yourself. It's about you honoring your experience, because probably the brutal truth is probably no one else is going to do it for you, okay? And you spend all your time looking after other people. This is about you looking after yourself. You deserve this time. So self-compassion is about understanding your suffering, not shaming and blaming yourself for being in pain. You wouldn't shame and blame anyone else. And remember this, many women say, I feel like I'm a bad person, I've got badness in me, the abuse has made me feel bad and ashamed. Replace bad with sad, okay? Really simple, really effective. Yeah, when you feel there's badness in you, think it's not badness, there's sadness. I'm sad. What do people need when they're sad? They need kindness. They need non-judgment. They need non-criticism. Okay, so we come back to this. Okay, so I'm going to read through the rest quickly. We've got about 10 to 15 minutes. You are not alone. Self-compassion involves recognizing that suffering and personal inadequacy is part of the shared human experience. You are not alone with your feelings of loneliness. Yeah, it's something we all go through, everyone. So Kristin Neff is a self-compassion researcher and the first to define the term academically. She describes self-compassion as having three elements: self-kindness, we've talked about that a lot, refraining from harsh criticism of the self. 2, recognizing one's own humanity. All people are imperfect and all people experience pain. You are not alone with your depression. You're not alone with your feelings of isolation. You're not alone. Really important. Mindfulness. This is maintaining a non-biased awareness of experiences. So don't ignore your pain, don't exaggerate it, but staying with the truth of your experience. And that RAIN exercise, the recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. It's a really good way of bringing some mindfulness to your experience. There's her website there. If any of you want to see what Kristin Neff says, because she's an expert on self-compassion. And these are some affirmations. If you are with yourself, we're talking about trying to undo the brainwashing of abuse, you might want to think about self-affirmations as almost a sort of reprogramming of yourself. These are taking out the negative messages you maybe have been given all your life and putting some new messages in. I accept the best and worst aspects of who I am. Changing is never simple, but it's easier if I stop being hard on myself. The more you force yourself to change or cheer up, the sort of less likely it is to happen. When you relax and when you allow yourself to be who you are, things are far more fluid. My mistakes just show that I'm growing and learning. Yeah. If we didn't make mistakes, we'd never learn. We'd be stuck. Okay, so mistakes can be really positive. It's okay to make mistakes and I can forgive myself. I am free to let go of others' judgments. Stop wanting other people's validation. Just think about what you think of yourself. It is safe for me to show kindness to myself. We talked about this, trying to create internal safety. I deserve compassion, tenderness, and empathy from myself. I can do that for myself. Every day is a new opportunity. I won't let self-doubt or judgment hold me back from the future. You deserve a future. Yeah. I forgive myself and I accept my flaws because nobody's perfect. I'm not the first person to have felt this way and I won't be the last. You're not alone, but I am growing. So healing from trauma. Trauma disconnects us from self. Yeah. It makes it very hard to be on our own when we have trauma. Self-compassion reconnects us to ourselves. So self-understanding and self-compassion are the key to healing and releasing shame. It is important to try and replace internal criticism and judgment with self-understanding and nurturing. Self-care means treating yourself with respect and kindness, the opposite to the abuse you have experienced. Think about showing yourself these qualities, just as you would to a friend who'd been abused. Patience, patience, patience. It takes a long time to heal from trauma. Take away all the shoulds. I should be over it by now. I should be better. It takes a long time. Be patient. It's a journey. Okay. Gentleness, respect, nurturing attention. Pay yourself kind attention. Yeah. That protects you when you do that. It means if you ignore yourself and then someone comes along and love bombs you, you're far more vulnerable to that sort of attention. If you're paying loving attention to yourself, it means that you don't crave it from other people in the same way. Non-judgment, absolute non-judgment. Really, it's so important. As soon as you start judging yourself, you're bringing the shame back in. So we stay with non-judgment. Warmth, that quality of warmth, humor. You're human, we all make mistakes. Bring warmth, kindness, empathy, and understanding. And then there's just really practical self-care when you're on your own. We talked about on your own, you're more likely to self-neglect. Think about eating 3 healthy meals a day, going for a walk in nature, practicing sleep hygiene, listening to soothing podcasts, if that helps, or music. If you are able to, I know it's very hard, but if you're able to spend time with safe people, or maybe just watching a comforting film, etc. Okay, these are some helpful quotations about loneliness. I wanted to put them in because I wanted you to know that this loneliness is something that people, philosophers, writers, artists, everyone has struggled with at some point in their life. There is nothing outside of yourself. Look within. Everything you want is there. You are that. That's by the poet Rumi. I really love that because it's saying you've got it all. It's all in you. Okay, recognize your worth and your value. We all feel alone, and in this we are connected. You are not alone with feeling alone. Every single human being who is alive has felt this kind of pain, hopelessness and loneliness at one time or another. We are all connected through this shared pain and struggle. It's part of being human. There's nothing wrong with you. This means you're a human. The worst part of holding the memories is not the pain, it's the loneliness of it. Memories need to be shared. So I also want to say, if you're allowed to ask for help, okay? Really important. You know, it's about we can learn to be with ourselves, and also we're allowed to ask for help. Having good therapy is about this. It's about sharing your pain, your memories, so you're not on your own with them. Many women I work with have incredibly traumatic memories, and they have them all on their own. And when you share them, you're witnessed. It brings witness to your experience and validation. So yeah, if you're interested in support groups at Women's Trust, please let me know. It's easy to stand in the crowd, but it takes courage to stand alone. Sometimes being on our own takes great courage. You know, there's so much pressure to conform, to do with social media and all the things in the press, and sometimes it takes courage to stand alone. It can be a position of strength. And that's Mahatma Gandhi, who was a great advocate of human rights. Loneliness is not lack of company. Loneliness is lack of purpose. So again, this is about coming back to, you might not agree with all these things, and that's absolutely fine, by the way, but loneliness is a state of mind, okay? If you have things in your life that give your life meaning and things you value, you don't feel so alone, okay? Albert Einstein said, the woman who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. The woman who walks alone is likely to find herself in places no one has been before. Being alone can give you an opportunity to go on journeys within yourself and really get to know yourself. Yeah, it's so important. Time spent undistracted and alone in self-examination, that could be journaling, meditation, resolves the unresolved, and it takes us from mentally fat to fit. Now, you don't have to agree with that, but being on your own can be an opportunity. It can be an opportunity to heal, okay? But that's why we need to do it with self-compassion. So this is taking the pathologizing of loneliness and saying, actually, it could be a choice. You might choose at some points in your life to be on your own and give yourself time and space to heal. But also recognize we also need connection as well. Ordinary men hate solitude, but the master makes use of it, embracing his aloneness, realizing he is at one with the whole universe. Now that's a bit cosmic, but I guess it's saying that we're ultimately all alone. We're all alone, but we're all connected through that as well. And that loneliness could be something you choose as a positive act for you. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. If you beat yourself up, you're not going to bring yourself peace. If you bring self-compassion to yourself, that's when you start getting peace of mind. Personally, I'm far more interested in that than anything else. Happiness is fleeting. It comes and goes. Peace of mind is what I'm looking for. And I think that comes with learning to be with yourself, with loving kindness and attention. Loneliness is the poverty of self. Solitude is the richness of self. So maybe this is about changing thinking, I'm choosing solitude. I'm choosing that because I'm choosing to enrich myself. And I'm reading this out, and some of you might be saying, I don't want to be on my own. I'm not choosing it. And I hear you, okay? I'm just talking about those times when you are on your own, how you can treat yourself to try and make it a nourishing experience. And I'm also very aware as I read this out that we're human beings and we need tribes like bees need hives, okay? So it's all about balance, time with yourself, and then if you're able to, time with your tribe who treat you with respect. The loneliness you feel is actually an opportunity to reconnect with others and yourself. And in this webinar, we've been looking a lot at how you can reconnect with yourself with self-compassion. So maybe re-seeing loneliness as an opportunity. If you are never alone, you cannot know yourself. And that's Paulo Coelho. And I really like that. If you're permanently with other people, you're not spending time with you. If you don't spend time with you, you're going to remain a stranger to yourself. So I think that's really important to think about. What a lovely surprise to discover how unlonely being alone can be. I like that because I have to say I'd rather be on my own and be with myself than be with the wrong people. I think nothing's worse than feeling really lonely in a crowd. And I'd rather be with me because that can be an unlonely experience if you bring compassion to it. You cannot be lonely if you like the person you're alone with. Okay, you get the theme here. Okay, it's about, if you can bring compassion to yourself and start enjoying your company, you might feel less alone with yourself. Okay, I always end on this image because I think it's so beautiful. Self-compassion is the gold with which we heal. Trauma, domestic abuse shatters us. It makes us feel broken, alone, damaged. If we can bring self-compassion to our broken self, we can heal. And that's traumatic growth, okay? So this is an art form, kintsukuroi. It means to repair with gold. The art of repairing pottery with gold or silver lacquer, or understanding that the piece is more beautiful for having been broken. So I'd like you to try and bring that to yourself and think about yourself like that, okay? That you might feel broken, but if you bring self-compassion to your experiences of isolation, this could be an opportunity to heal. So getting support. We're also saying it's very important to get support as well. When we have been abused, we lose our trust and faith in human nature, and it can be tempting to self-isolate as this feels safer. However, this can make life lonely and empty. So it's important we find ways of getting support and connection with people when we are ready to do so. Workshops and support groups can be a safe way of meeting other people who've had similar experiences in confidential settings. Some women also find voluntary work a good way to connect with others. And also voluntary work can be a good way to connect with your values as well. It might be you want to work with animals, not people, but that might give you a sense of connecting with your values. Yoga classes, the gym, art classes can be safe ways also to connect with people, excuse me, in an environment where you have something to do and don't have to open up if you don't want to. Sorry, just having a drink there. Okay, so where to get support? As usual, here are some websites, places for support. And the Samaritans phone line is also there. And legal advice is Rights of Women at the end. And I've also put the website in for self-compassion and the book I've been referring to today, Lost Connections by Johann Hari, which is a really lovely book. So at Women's Trust, also we offer these services to women across London, one-to-one counselling, support groups, workshops and webinars. So I'm going to finish the webinar now and thank you so much for listening. Thank you.